If you're not Egyptian or familiar with the music of the Arab world, you might not recognize the name Abdel Halim Hafez. Perhaps at most you'd recognize his song Kosara Kosara, even if you don't think you would, because it's the song that Timbaland recreated for the beat of Jay-Z and UGK's song Big Pimpin'. To be honest, I only really knew about Abdel because I took a class in college on world music and then I did a project on American artists sampling international songs like that one. But all of us are missing out on one hell of a story. Abdel lost both of his parents within a few months of being born. At the age of 11, he contracted a rare parasitic disease called schistosomiasis, which gave him complications for the rest of his life. The first big opportunity he got in music was filling in for a more famous artist, Muhammad Abdel Wahab. The crowd wanted him to play Wahab's songs, but when he decided to play his own, he got kicked off stage and peppered with tomatoes and eggs. And yet, Wahab still saw potential in Abdel and decided to work with him. Abdel persisted to become what the New York Times called the combination Elvis Presley Frank Sinatra of the Arab world. His music bridged the gap between younger and older audiences, and it was deeper than just liking the songs. His more patriotic songs became the soundtrack of Egypt's 1952 revolution. When Hafez passed away from complications caused by his schistosomiasis in 1977, some estimate that over 2 million people attended his funeral, as it paraded through the streets of Cairo. There are some unconfirmed reports that at least 4 women jumped from their balconies out of grief. His fans every year visit his grave to this day, and his music has remained important through other big political moments in Egypt, like the 2011 Arab Spring Egyptian Revolution and throughout the entire Arab world. Abdel Halim Hafez was, by any angle of looking at it, a superstar. Here in the United States, we have a long history of our own superstars, from the aforementioned Elvis to Michael Jackson, to someone like Beyonce or Taylor Swift today. But most of the artists that we have on the top of the mountain right now have been there for a long time. And some are starting to show signs of a readiness to move on with their lives. Drake, who is by some metrics the most commercially successful rap artist of all time, was flirting with the idea of retirement before he stumbled his way into a rap beef last year and now has a chip on his shoulder. The Weeknd, who at the time of me recording this has the second most monthly listeners of anybody on earth on Spotify, supposedly released his last album under that name earlier this year. Taylor Swift, while still releasing some new music, has incorporated nostalgia into her brand with the Eras Tour and her Taylor's Version re-releases, which can be interpreted as a sign that she's ready to ease off the gas a little bit in terms of just pumping out new stuff all the time. Childish Gambino, maybe not a superstar solely off music, but probably adds up to one when you take all his contributions together, hung up the Childish Gambino name last year. This would just feel like the natural cycle of superstars becoming legacy acts, the way that great athletes retire and young ones take their place, if it weren't for the lack of new superstars coming behind them. People don't agree on much these days, but one thing that seems to be almost universally agreed upon in the music industry is that there aren't many huge artists ready to take the thrones of those who have been at it for years. There have been countless articles written, tweets sent, think pieces thought, and discourses started around this idea over the past few years, not just by industry heads, but by fans and the artists themselves. Why isn't there an obvious next Drake in rap music? Why isn't there a clear successor to Taylor Swift in pop or country? Why isn't there a clear Rihanna or Beyonce in the R&B and pop worlds? So today I want to take a look at this phenomenon. We have to start by determining exactly what is a superstar. Once we figure out how to determine what a superstar is, I'm going to try to look at some of the main reasons that I think people feel like we don't have any new ones, and then try to answer the question, do we even need more? But first, if you like videos on music like this one, I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe. I post a video every week, and if you want to see them early, go to my Instagram, HADJI Gaviota, throw me a follow, and join my broadcast channel. I post all my videos in that broadcast channel one day early for free. Also wanted to say thanks to everyone who's checked out my group Elmjack's latest song, Closer Sober. If you like the instrumental playing in the background, to give you an idea of what it sounds like, I'll put a link to the video in the description so you can check it out. We've got another song coming this month with a feature. I'm really excited about it, so stay tuned. All right, let's get back to the video. The origins of the word superstar are a bit murky. Andy Warhol said in an interview in 1977 that the word was invented by Jack Smith, an underground cinema pioneer in New York City, who made films in the 1960s and 70s satirizing Hollywood. While he may have been using the word in a more tongue-in-cheek manner, today people use it to describe those very stars that he was poking fun at. There are a few definitions that we can use today as a baseline. Wikipedia calls a superstar someone who has great popular appeal and is widely known, prominent, or successful in their field. Oxford defines it as a high-profile and extremely successful performer or athlete. The two components in common here are that the person has to have strong name recognition and also has to be very successful. So those are the two categories that we'll use, but we'll have to quantify them somehow too. Success is quantifiable in a few different ways. Album sales, net worth, size of venue on tour, big festival headliners or halftime shows, follower counts, and awards. All of those things are relevant here. Name recognition, though, is a lot harder to pin down. Just because you and I both know an artist, as a creator and a watcher of music content on YouTube, doesn't mean that the average person will know that artist. So this category feels a little bit more subjective. I'll try my best, and later on we can talk about how I feel about name recognition in 2025 in general. Another distinction that I want to make is between what I would call a superstar and what I would call a celebrity or a legacy act. For the sake of this video, I want to look at people who are currently releasing things and putting up big numbers. Even if you might think they're out of their prime quality-wise, we're just going to put that to the side. Some artists that I'd call superstars today are Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Drake, Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, SZA, Post Malone, Eminem, Ariana Grande, Nicki Minaj, The Weeknd, depending on how retired he is, I guess. And on a global scale, Bad Bunny, BTS, Blackpink. Now, before you go to the comment section to say, what about, I'm not going to sit here and actively rattle off every artist who might fit the box of being a superstar. If you're thinking of them, there's a decent chance that they are one, but that's not really the point of this video. A celebrity is a very famous and recognizable person, but they might be lacking in recent success in music compared to the true superstars. Soulja Boy, Bow Wow, and Nick Cannon are 3 examples. They're really famous, but they haven't released any extremely commercially successful work in a pretty long time, even if they did do it at one point. They could still be artists, they could still be active, they could be putting out the best work of their life, but they aren't superstars in the active tense of music. A legacy act is an artist who was once a superstar, but just isn't putting stuff out like that anymore. Jay-Z is the perfect example, one of the most commercially successful rap artists of all time, but he hasn't dropped an album since 2017, and it kind of seems like he might be retired. If he announces a new album, maybe that changes, but legacy acts can still put out new music. It's just that they're maybe not in the full circuit. People like 50 Cent and Snoop Dogg have incredibly successful music careers under their belt, and they still do release things here or there, and maybe they're doing a little better than the guys that I referenced as celebrities. But they have not been primarily famous specifically for music-related things for a pretty long time now. Sure, they can still go on tour and sell tickets at a high level, but Snoop is too busy being in half the commercials you see on TV and every multiplayer shooter game you can think of, and 50 Cent is probably making the show that you were watching when you got to commercials and then saw Snoop Dogg. So they have bigger fish to fry than putting out their 15th solo album right now. Most of the media discourse about the music industry not producing superstars came in 2022 and 2023, when Olivia Rodrigo was deemed to be the only superstar produced in that time period. But within the last year or two, I think we've actually seen 2 new artists that are contenders pop up. Chappell Roan and Sabrina Carpenter. Both make poppy, accessible music and have die-hard fan bases, and have established that both through the more fleeting, in-the-moment stats, like album sales and monthly listeners, but also through the harder thing to prove, hard ticket sales. In 2023, Chappell Roan was still a best-kept secret, and she was playing venues like Brooklyn Steel in New York, which has a capacity of about 1,800. By the end of 2024, after viral hits and breakout festival appearances that stole the show, she sold out a show at the First Bank Amphitheater in Tennessee, which has a capacity of 7,500. She hasn't toured in America besides those festivals since she really blew up, so I'm very interested to see the size of the venue she plays next. Meanwhile, Sabrina Carpenter is doing arena tours as we speak. These are budding superstars. They've done everything right so far, but I think they'll need to prove it again with another successful album cycle before they'll be established for good. Remember, in 2020, it would have been a safe bet to say that DaBaby was going to be one of the most commercially successful rap artists of the 2020s. No disrespect to him, I actually like DaBaby, but sometimes things don't stay at that level. Olivia Rodrigo had a second successful album that really solidified her in 2023. As long as Sabrina and Chappell do the same, they'll be right there with her. Now that we've set some guidelines for what exactly a superstar is, let's try to figure out why we just don't have that many of them. Or at least why it feels that way. Here's a scary stat. Of the top 20 highest selling hip hop albums of 2024, only 9 of them actually released in 2024. I'm not counting Days Before Rodeo because it was a mixtape that was available for an entire decade, but even if you wanted to include that, then half of them came out in 2024. And I'm not sure how much better that is. Well, it's 5% better. Album sales today are a bit of a convoluted thing. That doesn't mean that people are running to Best Buy to buy copies of Damn on CD. A huge chunk of album sales come from streaming online, or buying digital copies that come with shirts or other merch, or buying physical copies on vinyl. which, to be fair, for the majority of buyers is more like merch than it is like a physical thing you're going to listen to. In 2023, Music Business Worldwide reported that 50% of vinyl buyers don't even own a vinyl player. Streaming makes it so that fans have access to pretty much all recorded music at their fingertips. New releases then have to compete with old releases at all times. You might like some songs on Drake's For All the Dogs, Kendrick Lamar's GNX, but do you like them more than Feel No Ways or Money Trees? Artists now have to compete with not just whoever is releasing that week, but with their past selves and then with the entirety of recorded music. This makes it a bit harder for albums to take up space in the music discourse or also just in your personal rotation. This, coupled with social media, also means that older superstars are constantly in your face, in your ears at all times. In the past, if an artist stopped touring, stopped releasing new projects, they would just fade into the background of their expensive Malibu mansion and leave room for the next artist to pop up and take that slot on the radio or the primetime TV performance or the headlining set. So because we still have Drake, Kendrick, Taylor, and Beyonce right in front of us, it makes the new guys a little bit less appealing because we're already invested in the lore and the story of these guys, and they haven't really gone anywhere. How are you supposed to compete with that as a new artist? And so smaller artists are blocked from the light by that tippy top tier, kind of like an algae bloom in a lake. And at the same time, they're fighting for food scraps with an overpopulated space of fish below them and with them. There's a great pull in the article that Billboard ran called "Why Aren't More Pop Stars Being Born?" They reference a tweet that references a line from the movie The Incredibles. Once everyone is super, no one is. The meaning of fame has changed so much in the social media era. People can go viral and become famous for pretty much anything and in just like a second. It just isn't as special to be famous anymore. There are those tweets that go around that are like, if he did this in 2016, he would have gotten on Ellen. Like, people are so used to people going viral, that's just kind of normal. It's still very special to be very talented. And not to say that superstars aren't, because most of them are. But when you go to the definitions of the word that we covered, you'll note that they revolve around being known and being successful. Obviously, talent is going to help you get there, but being the most talented in your field is not a requirement. Superstardom is about fame and notoriety. When you only see a few artists on CD shelves and hear the same few artists on the radio, that notoriety was a lot easier to achieve. As for the actual music, it's never been easier for a random person to make a song thanks to technology like the internet and BandLab. There are reports from 2022 that over 100,000 songs are being uploaded to Spotify and other DSPs every day. In addition, that 2020 to 2021 TikTok era was probably the easiest it's ever been for a random song to go viral. Today, you can skip a lot of the old steps required to break a hit song. No more going to the label and begging them to release it to see the vision. And then going on radio tours where you'd have to meet the DJ in every city and try to impress them so that they'll play your song. You can be like Tommy Richmond, post a snippet to your song on TikTok, and 2 weeks later you have the #2 song in the country. Labels are spending less and less time developing artists that they think are going to be major superstars from the ground up. Instead, they wait for the artists to develop on their own, and then jump in to give them the money to push it. Funnily enough, Sabrina Carpenter and Olivia Rodrigo are actually two exceptions to that because they came up in the Disney system. But even then, at the same time, you have an artist like Chappell Roan who was signed really early and then dropped because she didn't blow up fast enough, only to go do it on her own and then come back on her own terms. In the recent past, when technology made it easier to make music, and the internet made it easier to get listeners, but before the TikTok boom, if you wanted to be famous and you were reasonably talented, music was a great vehicle for that. Well, it still can be for some people. Other tempting options like streaming or, hey, YouTube have started to pull away some of the people who maybe would have dipped their toes into music, as long as those people were only getting into music because they wanted fame, glory, and riches. If you were Bad Baby, if you were the Catch Me Outside girl at the moment that went viral, it wasn't an option to just stream after, but maybe that's what she would have done. And maybe this kind of like barrier is a good thing for people who want to put the music above everything and they actually prioritize music, but it also shows how incredibly crowded the music space is today. One of the reasons why Abdel Halim Hafez was so special is he was able to unite a fan base across generations. Young and old people alike loved Abdel and his music. That's hard to pull off, but we also have to remember that he did it in a country where today 99% of Egyptian citizens are ethnically Egyptian, and at least 80% of the population is the same religion. Egypt is a much more homogenous country than the United States. So even though these followers of Hafez were different ages, pretty much all of them grew up within the same culture and had the same touch points, and experienced similar things, with class and just age group being really the only two separators. Here in the United States, that is not the case. And in a bubble, that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a different thing. People across the United States, a country that is 9 times the size of Egypt with 3 times the population, are living vastly different lives, depending on their setting, their culture, their background, and their economic status. For example, as I talk about on here from time to time, I grew up in New York City. I was basically never exposed to country music. Half the country loves country music. There are so many different channels, waves, subgenres, pockets. It's very difficult for an artist to have a sound and a message that will speak to everyone. And this is without considering that in the global age that we live in today, many of your fans are probably just somewhere else in the world. Because that world is so big, and thanks to innovations in social media and music streaming, you don't have to even try to speak to everyone to become a massive success. In the past, you had to go through traditional routes. But today, algorithm-driven apps like TikTok and Instagram Reels have created a system where you can just deliver your stuff right to the people, to the point where even when you reach really impressive levels of success, people outside that algorithm might have no idea that you exist. A good chunk of people watching this video have probably never heard of the band Sleep Token. Here, take this opportunity, go in the comment section and tell me if you were familiar with Sleep Token before this video or not. I'm curious. They're an anonymous alternative metal band from England, but they've taken their niche much further than most people would imagine that definition would go. They just sold out a US arena tour, including venues like the Barclays Center in New York, that has a capacity of 19,000. Last year I talked about how some legacy acts or celebrities like the Black Keys or Jennifer Lopez were struggling to sell out arenas. And I'd guess, on average, that people watching this video are more familiar with the music of the Black Keys, definitely more familiar with the personality of Jennifer Lopez. And yet, those people were not pulling in people the way that Sleep Token was. Only an era like this could give us a band and a story like Panchico, an English group that dropped a demo tape back in the 1990s, only to break up and go on to become regular people with regular jobs. Then in 2016, someone found that demo tape in a charity shop, and they posted it on the internet where they were trying to figure out where it came from. People listened to this distorted, old rip of the album and loved it, and spent years trying to find the band members. And when they finally tracked them down, the band members had no idea that they had this beloved fan base. So they got back together and they've been successfully touring and releasing new music ever since. Today, fans can decide who gets to be famous, even if the artists themselves have long given up on the idea of doing that. The leading philosophy in music now is if you're trying to reach everyone, you end up reaching nobody at all. The past model of the superstar tried to reach everyone. They would reach across different aisles, different demographics, different listener groups, and try to pull them all together. Drake is a great example. Even super early in his career, he was rapping about in his lyrics how different some of the pockets of his fanbase were. And yet from that moment, he's branched out even further, making paranoid mob boss Atlanta trap music, while also dancing with a turtleneck on for poppier fans of Hotline Bling. And he'd do stuff like that on the same album sometimes, and a lot of the fans, me included, love both of them. J. Cole has spoken a ton about how the label was pressuring him to make these hit songs, and they wouldn't let him put out an album until they had something that felt like a hit song. And that ended up being Workout. At that time, the labels thought if you didn't have this traditional hit song, and they had a very narrow idea of what it would sound like, you weren't able to put out a successful album. Cole's first album and his career in general served as proof that that really wasn't the case anymore. The internet let him reach his core fans without going through the radio or the traditional channels. And for him, it turned out there were a lot of those core fans. Even though the radio is not as much of a consideration as it once was, newer rap superstars like Playboi Carti still do the obligatory crossover hit. But it's often much less than guys like Drake or J. Cole used to do. Like, yes, Carti has songs like Rather Lie or Timeless with The Weeknd, but he also on the same album will put a song like Opium Baby. And the popularity of his signees like Ken Carson, who does not do any of that crossover stuff, tells us that there is a huge fan base of kids who are ready to fill out a pretty big venue to just hear the opium rage music. All of that makes Carti songs like Rather Lie feel like more of an insurance plan, or a begrudging handshake deal with the label like, okay fine, here, take this one, rather than something that Carti really wants or needs to be doing. The song might reach people who wouldn't know who Carti is otherwise, but in 2025, I would argue that Carti might not even have to reach those guys to be a superstar. I like to call this the YouTubeification of music. Your YouTube homepage likely looks a lot different from mine. I watch nerdy videos about Pokemon challenges, and some of the guys that I watch have hundreds of thousands of subscribers. If you don't also watch this genre of video, you won't know who these guys are. You'll walk right past them on the street. And yet, according to my homepage, these are the most important creators in the world. As music discovery and listenership relies more and more on algorithms, it becomes a lot like the YouTube homepage. I open Spotify and see a homepage full of music that I already listen to or things that are a lot like the things that I already listen to. The artists that have the most monthly listeners in the world, for the most part, do not enter my rotation. It's not because I'm some sort of hipster, It's just I like what I like, you know? And this is the same way that I don't see Mr. Beast videos on my YouTube homepage even though he has 400 million subscribers. When music was dominated by the radio, you heard the top 40 songs whether you wanted to or not. That has changed, and along with it, so has the meaning of being a star. People can be stars, superstars even, in their own universes, without worrying too much about their gravity outside of that one. In theory, the internet is freeing, because you aren't forced to listen to whatever's on the radio, or forced to spend $10 to buy a new album without even knowing if you're gonna like it or not. But at the same time, what you and I see on the internet is instead being decided by algorithms developed by tech employees at Apple, Google, X, and Tencent. This applies to music as well, companies like Spotify. These apps make guesses about what I'm gonna like, until I interact with something on the app enough for them to be like, oh, I think he likes this. Then I get fed that thing until I stop interacting with it. It's not really that much different from Instagram Reels. I keep watching Italian brain rot videos, they keep giving me Italian brain rot. I keep listening to indie R&B, they keep giving me Bathe. So if you haven't shown interest in Sleep Token, or Panchico, or Billy Woods, then you probably won't get those guys on your FYP, your Discover Weekly, your Spotify radio. But in some universes, those guys are numero uno. This might sound crazy, but let's look at the track record of some of the artists who become the biggest and the brightest superstars. Kanye West lost his mind. Michael Jackson lost his life. Drake had to deal with the old adage, the bigger you are, the harder you fall. Kendrick Lamar barely went outside for like 4 years after his biggest album, Damn. Talked about spending weeks without looking at his phone, just to protect himself from it all. Taylor Swift, in some pockets, is one of the most hated people in America, and there's a Venn diagram with some overlap for the pocket where Beyonce is one of the most hated people in America. In a time when artists don't have to appeal to everybody to make a very, 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 very comfortable living, why still try to appeal to everybody? It's absolutely true that most people, regular people, would instantly trade their lives for that of the people I just mentioned, maybe besides Kanye right now. But that's the wrong comparison to be making. We need to look at the guys who are one step below this rung. The artists who are beloved by their fans and already rich enough to be generationally wealthy. Would they want to trade their current life for superstardom when they've got everything that they want where they're at? We see these artists who get a taste of the upperest of the upper echelon and then decide to take a step back. Lauryn Hill won a Grammy for her first album and then never dropped another real studio album again. Frank Ocean finessed the major label system and released a classic album independently that people love, and then has mostly done his own thing and stayed out of the biggest lights for the most part over the past decade. If you're Chappell Roan, people are already writing think pieces and takedowns when you say literally anything, even if it's like a pretty normal thing to say, picking apart every word in every interview. How much further do you want to take that when you can already achieve generational wealth at the level that you're at? Look at the song titles and the concepts that we see from artists once they hit that level of superstardom. The Weeknd's Escape from LA. And honestly, a lot of the topics that he's touched on over the past few projects. J. Cole's Land of the Snakes. And the message on Love Yours that in some ways being broke was better. The way Justin Bieber has been posting on his IG story recently. They don't make the superstardom thing look that fun. Maybe they're trying to make other artists think it's not fun so that they have less competition. Or maybe some part of it is just that the grass is always greener. And people will find a way to complain about their lives no matter where they're at. Or maybe it's just wise to take these people at their word and accept that there is a level of fame where it is no longer healthy. Just some food for thought. I think we've unpacked why people feel like there aren't artists at the tippy top upper echelon anymore. Monoculture is dead. We all see different things. So we're all seeing different people. And when we go to talk about those big stars, the stars in my universe are not the same as the one in yours, even though we have a bunch of things in common. But the real question is, here in America, or in the Western world at large, are we missing anything by not having any of these superstars? Maybe we're better off. The stan culture around celebrities and the blind idol worship that comes with it is not doing much for creating a generation of people with the capability to think for themselves. Plus, artists who align more with what it is you actually like has to be better than getting the same few artists dominating the radio. And yet, when I think about the power of an artist like Abdel Halim Hafez, and many other examples in many other countries across the world, it makes you wonder why we can't have something like that in the United States. Someone that people old and young love. Someone that people can rally around and create genuine, political power and excitement. Here in the United States, we quantify a superstar on things like album sales. and dominance on the Billboard charts. And while that makes sense, because cultural impact is a little bit too hard to quantify anyway, it is also a product of our society being so focused on making money. Fans of artists celebrate these album sales metrics like we're gonna get a cut of it. Abdel barely ever recorded music and mostly just performed live. Almost all of his released albums were just collections of live recordings, or compilations of things that he recorded for like movies. These metrics and benchmarks that we have are things that our society invented and decided were the best way to quantify artists in our particular context. And as a result, we have a music industry where at the highest level, every decision is weighed around how much money it makes. Kendrick Lamar is an artist who maybe has the closest comparison to someone like Abdel Halim Hafez for the way that his song All Right became a rallying cry at so many different protests in America across the last decade. And his performance in the Super Bowl, which, as the name would tell you, is something that's usually reserved for superstars, makes a big reference to how he has to play the game and do certain things to stay within the good graces of the industry. He turned that into a statement in itself. And if he had ignored all that and just made some grand, straightforward political statement, the people at the NFL and the people who own the labels, they might not even disagree with his views on a personal level, but their biggest issue and the reason why they'd never let somebody do that has to do with money, or how they might lose sponsorships, lose customers who disagree, maybe even lose federal support. And look, I promise I'm not trying to take this into too political of a world, but I'm not doing it for no reason. Because when we look at the future of the superstar, this is a great way to understand that a big reason why we don't see as many of them is probably just because of money. It costs a lot of bread to create a superstar. Labels invest in these artists for years before the artists start printing them money, and there's only a small sweet spot in the length of a deal where the artist is still signed to label-friendly terms but then starts making superstar money. Artists who finish out their first deals like Drake, J. Cole, and Kendrick Lamar, go check their newest releases and you'll see that it says under exclusive license to their labels. That's because they're in a position where they own their masters and can now sell licenses to the labels to exploit their albums for a set period at terms that are way better than their first deals were. These deals are still profitable for labels, of course, but they don't quite hit the same, I would imagine. And for labels, imagine investing millions into an artist just to not make it back, when instead, you can just bet on a sure thing like Sleep Token, a band that did all the work of finding all their fans for you. So you can just give them money so that they can come make even more of it for you. If superstars were still as easy to break as they used to be, then trust me, labels would still be pushing and trying to create them. Because even if they didn't all work out, the ones that did would more than cover the losses of the rest. So yeah, there's my theory. Once again, it all comes down to the money. Let me know if you guys think I missed anything, or if there's anything you want me to cover next. And I'll see you next time.